All right, we got a special treat today. Andrew Baeckstrom here and Corey Burkhart, and we're not the special treat. You guys see us on these broadcasts all the time, but today we have the Eternal World Champion joining us for an interview. Lights Out Ace, welcome. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing great. It's always fantastic to be on camera, especially with fine fellows like yourselves.
Just to get things started, you are our Eternal World Champion. You won the 2020 Eternal World Championships. So we know that about you, but why don't you tell everyone watching at home a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and really sort of who you are?
Okay, well, I've lived in Wisconsin my whole life. I grew up near Eau Claire, and I live in Madison now. I'm an actuary by trade, but that's a thing I do. Who I am is a strategy gamer. I play lots of board games. I play lots of card games. I play lots of survival horror games, and that's kind of what I do.
Who is Lights Out Ace? Where did that name come from?
So there was a website in the early 2000s with message boards called GameFAQs.
Yeah.
Back in the old Player's Guide days, it was hard to find video game walkthroughs, and GameFAQs was the place to go. And when I signed up for those message boards when I was, I want to say 12, I thought it sounded really cool. Like Lights Out is kind of a cool phrase, like Lights Out, gotcha. And then Ace is just a cool high flying name, so Lights Out Ace. And then I used it when I organized Melee tournaments in college, and so it was just always attached to me. So then I just kept on using it as I'm 31 now, and I still use my name I made when I was 12.
How did you first get started playing Eternal? Do you remember what year it was, and how did you first hear about the game?
I remember it exactly. It was July 2016, back when it was still a closed beta. One of my friends was playing it on his tablet in between rounds of a local Magic tournament, and he was showing me one of the really cool things in Eternal was the stat modifications persist between zones. And he was playing a Haunting Scream Dark Return deck, and I just thought that was so cool. And he had an extra closed beta key and gave it to me.
Do you remember what some of your early favorites were? What were some of the first cards that jumped out to you? You mentioned Dark Return and Haunting Scream. Were there any early closed beta cards that you still have fond memories of?
My favorite card was definitely Channel the Tempest. It was removal and card draw all in one. There was a quote bot on my old stream channel, and one of the quotes was, "I want to find somebody who looks at me the way Lights Out Ace looks at Channel the Tempest."
If Channel the Tempest is, the first real card that jumped out to you, is that your favorite card? What's your favorite deck as well?
My favorite deck is definitely Scrappy Hour. A deck that I had a large portion in making. I'm definitely not the only person to make it. I'm definitely the one who popularized it in a certain build. Super fun. I love grindy shadow mid-range decks. It's definitely my favorite archetype.
If you had our powers for the day, if you had the powers of the Direwolf devs, and you could change any card in Eternal, what would you change and why?
Well, I really miss playing those grindy sacrifice decks, so I try to change something to sort of bring those back into prominence and playability in Throne. So the card that would probably help the most would be Unfamiliar Interloper, revert the nerf on that. So you can play all the factions you want and have an excellent fodder card early on.
So you talked about it earlier, really enjoying the mid-range shadow decks. Is that your favorite faction? Like, what faction do you say that you identify with the most?
Oh, definitely Shadow. If I looked in-game, my Shadow is at 99, almost 100. And my other ones are in the high 80s, early 90s, except for Fire, which is 78.
Sure.
So I'm definitely a Shadow gamer.
So battle skills. Do you have a favorite battle skill in the game? And then if you could have a battle skill in real life, what would it be?
So my favorite battle skill in the game is definitely Warcry. I think it's super well designed to encourage attacking. I think that the animation where you see the little horn and it blows is super satisfying, and it goes over your deck. You're like, oh man, I wonder what got buffed. I sure hope I draw that soon. It's just a very exciting mechanic. I think it's one of the ones besides the stat persisting through zones. Or I guess it is an example of stats persisting through zones. Just an excellent showcase of the digital only mechanics in the game. Just such a fantastic mechanic. But if I could have one, I definitely choose flying, because if you could fly, why would you not choose flying? Being overwhelming is cool and all, but I'd rather just fly.
Yeah,
I think I would want to have Berserk to be able to eat twice, but yeah, Lights Out Ace, your choice of flying a little bit more effective there.
How does Reckless translate to eating?
Hmm.
I figure getting to attack twice, I'm just like, well, I'll take one bite out of you, and then I'm gonna come back for more. Maybe not the best analogy I can think of, but that's how I always think of it.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with revenge. My enemies aren't getting away with it. Turning our attention to your World Championship run. So taking it back to ECQ Strangelands, do you remember the deck that you qualified for to get to the World Championship?
Oh yeah, it was that classic LOA Gold garbage. It's the big grindy shadow mid-range deck that can play the game forever. At the time, Tazbu was the best card in Expedition, so it was a super shadow heavy. Like the only justice sources were 8 duels, 4 Seek Power, and 1 Justice Sigil.
You qualified pretty early on in the year, back in January of 2020, and then had to wait quite a bit of time before the World Championships. And in that time period, what did you do to stay sharp and start getting yourself ready? I mean, that's kind of a big ask, is like, you now know that you have all of this time to make sure you're at your best to try to win a huge tournament.
Yeah, mostly what I did is just freed up some weekends. Like the only tournaments I played from then on were all the quarterlies, because I had like 75 points, whatever it is, to get buys. So it's like a pretty easy shot into the top 64 from there. So it's like really high chance of getting into top 8 and winning more money. And then I played one more ECQ with Skycrag Chonkers, which is a deck that was involved in the development of, and I really loved that deck. That's the only other ECQ I played.
So for the World Championships, it was a two format tournament last year, Expedition and Throne. And in Expedition, you brought Skycrag Sling. Can you talk a little bit about that deck and what drew you to playing it?
Yeah, so Sling was the obviously most powerful card in Expedition that I think that whole format revolved around. And there was a popular list at the time that was FTP, which we really hated. It just it had a really inconsistent power base. It played a lot of cards that we just thought were absolute garbage, like Guardian of Spring. That was a huge trap, because if it ever died, you were just so far behind, you could never block again because your opponent had Eye of Winter. So we trimmed it down to just 2 factions. We added better cards like Torgov and Geminon. I think we kind of misjudged it. The TJS deck that several people brought was definitely a really bad matchup for us. But we didn't focus that much on Expedition since top 8 was Throne, and more of the Swiss rounds that mattered were Throne. Like you could make top 8 without winning a single Expedition if you swept Throne. So we spent probably 6 times longer on Throne than Expedition. We just found a deck that was good enough that we liked, and we just played.
You guys had just an absolute breakthrough performance. Everyone who was playing this Justice Primal Splashing Fire Controlless, a pretty close to unitless. You guys had Genève Merchant and Jotun Hurlers. Who was responsible for most of the development of this deck, and what went into tuning it?
So until 2 hours before registration, so like for us, it was the deck was to do at 5 o'clock on Friday night, and until 3 o'clock on Friday night, we were gonna play this even Xenon deck that was heavy time for Twin Spiteling. I put the deck on Eternal Warcry like after the tournament, so they'd be like, "This is what we almost played," and it was like very heavily teched for Elysian and Kira, which we thought were going to be popular. At the last minute, we're like, "Why aren't we just playing this control deck? Like the Xenon deck is great if the field is exactly what we expect, but if there's anything we don't expect or like anyone plays control, the Xenon is never beating control." And we had played a bunch of the control deck earlier in the week because like the first thing you want to do is just write it off. Just be like, all right, Yetis is going to be a popular deck because it's the best aggro deck. And it just gets completely smashed by it just completely smashes control, right? It's like control is unplayable, and we played it, and it's control won every single game. Like it just beat Yetis over and over and over and over again. We're like, okay, so like control actually does beat Yetis, so like maybe we can play that. But then we just kept on working on Xenon until right before the tournament. We're just like, does anything actually beat this control deck? It beats the mid-range decks. It beats Yetis. If you draw Stormhall Knife, it beats Elysian. And so we just registered it, and it really worked out.
Do you remember who was responsible for Savage Incursion, how that card ended up in your market? That card seemed like such an important piece of technology to give you more action against enemy sites.
Let's see. I'm pretty sure he pulled a random list off Warcry, probably from like the Burgund or somebody who uploads a million FJP decks. So we just kind of took that list off Warcry and probably changed 3 or 4 cards and then redid the power base with such master touches as a single Huru Vow as an extra justice source.
So you go through this whole tournament, you end up making it to the top 8, you end up winning the tournament. What's the first thing you do when you win the tournament?
Well, I went out of this back little computer room into the living room to tell my wife, who was taking care of my son at the time, that I had won the tournament. And she was tired, and she said, "Finally, let's go get some pizza." So I got in my car and I drove to Papa Murphy's, and I got a couple pizzas, and I came back and I baked them.
So it's not running around your room screaming, jumping up and down. It's, all right, babe, we can finally go get pizza.
I probably had like an emphatic like yes and like stood up sort of thing, but there wasn't a whole lot of running around screaming. There was mostly getting pizza. And then while I was in the car, then I was just like, I'm the world champion. I'm pretty great.
Are there any matches or memorable moments that are going to stand out to you from that World Championships?
I think the most memorable match, the one I think about the most, is the semifinals against Collector, who I think is the most fearsome player in the game, besides myself, of course. He won an ECQ both years. He made top 4 of both World Championships. The ECQ that I won back in January, I beat him in the finals. And then I played him in the top 16 to get into the top 8 and again in the top 4. Like, those matches are all super close and super intense. I remember I thought I was super far ahead in one game, and then he dazzled 2 Honor of Claws, and then suddenly he had more cards than me, and I died. And it's like, I can't believe I lost that game. Then I ended up winning. It was super relieving and exciting to have won that match.
So as far as like sort of getting good in Eternal, you mentioned you play a lot of strategy games. Sort of when you first started playing Eternal, were you just smashing people right away? Sort of how did you get better at the game and becomes maybe the best player in the world? Well, right now you are, at least.
Yeah, well, a lot of the skills from Magic definitely carried over. Like, I made Master my first like real month playing the game, and I think I was in the top 10 the last couple of months of closed beta. Granted, there weren't that many players then, but it's still like I was up there. So my getting good process kind of happened years before. But if you want to get good now, the main thing you do is just like get on the Discord, get talking to people, get on streams of people that you respect and talk to them and ask them if they make a play that you don't understand, be like, why did you do that? And they'll probably be pretty happy to explain to you why they did a thing. Or if you see a deck list and you're like, why are you playing those cards? People usually have reasons why they're playing those cards, and they'll share with you, and you can get opinions from a lot of different people, and you can really grow that way. It's just like asking kind of pointed questions with actionable results is the way to do it.
If you were to, help a player out who's in your stream, asking you questions through the Discord, what do you think is the most common, question or mistake somebody comes to you with?
So I think the biggest mistake and level up moment from becoming like an average player to becoming a good player is knowing that you don't always have to play your cards. A lot of times it'd be like, it's turn 2. This is when I cast my exploit, or my opponent has a unit and I have a removal spell, and I'm not going to spend my power on a unit this turn. I should use my removal spell on that unit. But a lot of times you're just supposed to do nothing. Like, if the card that beats you costs 6, you should use that exploit when your opponent has 5 power. If your opponent has a 2/2 and it's going to hit you for a little bit, but you're going to play a 3/4 next turn, just take 2 damage and play the 3/4 and save the removal spell for something scary with an ability or a bigger unit. So just like not playing a thing because you can, I think, is the biggest difference between the average players and the good players. And that sort of the whole thing folds into there. It's having a plan of like, how is this game going to look?
So sometimes it's about maximizing your cards. Sometimes it's about just getting what you can out of them. That makes a lot of sense. So as far as in continuing to improve, if you are a newer player who is looking to sort of start playing in some more Eternal tournaments and being able to compete, do you have any recommendations in terms of what kinds of decks you should try? Should you play a lot of different decks? Should you try to focus on one and getting better with it? If you were somebody who was trying to get better and make it to the World Championships, what kinds of things would you be spending your time doing?
So playing all of the decks at least a little bit to know how they function is definitely great. Like, if you have the resources, I would definitely play some games of Yetis, play some games of Kira, play some games of Elysian, play some games of sling. It was just like try everything. But if you don't like if you're a new player and you have your new player cards and you drafted 5 or 10 times, like you probably can build 1, maybe 2 decks. So then I would say focus on building one of the good decks. Learn what opening hands you can keep. Learn how you win each matchup. Learn when you want certain cards out of your market and when they're good and bad. Like for example, that Elysian versus Unitless control matchup. Like we played that so many times on both sides, and we learned that so what Collector is going to do is he's going to play his Merchant. He's going to get Mirror Image, so he gets 2 Aegis threats. And with the Mirror Image, he's going to get Sodi Spell Shaper, so he can start drawing cards with that. And that way he can keep up on cards with the Honor of Claws and the Wisdoms, because I have to spend 2 cards on each Aegis unit, and you get to draw more cards. So like learning your plan like that for each of the popular matchups and just jamming forever. That's how you get better. That's how you make the top 64s and the top 8s.
Yeah, I like that you called out going onto the Reddit, going onto the Discord, because there are a lot of helpful people on there. I know I've messaged players, just asked them for their deck list online, and most people are just genuinely pretty helpful. You can never control human beings, and they might do weird things, but I found most players in the community are just generally pretty helpful.
And really excited folks just to have other people to be able to oh, cool, you want to talk about this deck too? Like, let's, bounce ideas back and forth for 10, 15 minutes. And, then you get to go battle some games and come back and talk about it again. And that's how you end up making some of, these relationships that end up forming this is my testing partner, and then grows into something like you guys had LightsOutAce for Team Rank Star, where all of a sudden you guys just had this sort of team can blossom out of something like that.
Corey, do you have any more questions for LightsOutAce?
I don't. In fact, let's open up the floor. LightsOutAce, do you have any questions for us?
Do you guys pay attention to the community decks at all? Like, do you try out decks that people win tournaments with or put on Warcry or anything like that?
Yeah, we definitely do. We play ourselves on ladder to see some of what's going on, of course, and while we're testing, so we can make sure when we're making balance changes we're in tune. We have analytics here that we're looking at to get a sense of what's going on, but sometimes it's always fun when the analytics diverge from the tournament decks, and sometimes a deck that the community is super sold on for the tournaments and the competitive play, we look at it in the analytics and it's it's winning an okay amount.
Do you have an example of a deck like that? I guess an older one.
Well, the classic one is probably Yetis. I mean, at this point, I think the secret's out. But Yetis was basically the winningest deck in the game for a lot longer than it was ever given credit for being a serious competitive deck. And at this point, we could pretty safely just say this. We generally don't want to be trying to influence too much about the numbers say this deck's really great. So now everybody goes and just all starts playing that, and then it becomes swarmed. But yeah, Yetis was always just winning a ton, basically more than anything else.
What is your favorite card if you had one in Eternal?
It's usually something that we're currently working on. But as far as my actual favorite, all-time favorites, I think I just have to go with Privilege of Rank. I mean, that was the card when I first encountered the game. I started working on the game when set 2 was just about to come out. And that was the card that sort of blew my mind and made me want to just try all kinds of crazy things, and just got me sort of hooked on the deck building experience.
Mine's always been Aramat's Machinations. As you called out, the Dark Return, Haunting Scream, caring about different stats through zones. This one allows you to do it in so many different ways that if I can reduce the cost of my units, I can change what I'm getting back. Getting overwhelmed to a unit that's growing in size, if I can grow it further, that scales even harder. If I can maybe give double damage to it or lifesteal, that scales in just a totally different way. Usually if you run into me in the queues, I'm playing some sort of Aramat Machinations deck, even if it doesn't actually end up being the best thing.
Every month now, you've been having the patch notes with. I've been liking the nerfs a lot, and the buffs always come out of left field. How do you pick what old cards you're gonna buff?
Yeah, it's first of all, I would say that it is harder. There's sort of 2 general things we're looking for. One of which is things which have maybe old stuff which we knew was once popular and fun that people enjoyed, but maybe has fallen out of the limelight as newer cards come into the play and maybe pushed it out, and giving that a second chance. And so sometimes the cards will fall into that category. And sometimes it's just a real creative, just if anybody has inspiration. And sometimes we will literally just be, looking at community sections, suggestions and feedback, because there's ideas that we maybe haven't considered for a card to buff. And we're generally trying to make it so that there's something new to explore and not just make it so that it feels like we are trying to dictate what is good in the game. We want to make sure that with each live balance patch, there's hopefully something that no matter what kind of player you are, if we're going to be doing some buffs, that makes you go, oh, I kind of want to go and check that out. And, you know, we like it that some cards are good and some cards are bad, and it's fun to explore which is which. So obviously, you know, we always get the sort of the complaints, the classic complaints of like, this card is terrible. What if you made it slightly lot less terrible? And, you know, sometimes that's appropriate, but sometimes it's kind of dangerous, or maybe it wouldn't be that much fun if the card doesn't show up as often. Sometimes it's cool that there's a bad card in the game that somebody just gets to have be their pet thing, that they're the only one who knows how to make it even like medium when it's just terrible most of the time.
When we do live balance cards, particularly when we're making buffs in general, when they're not, I would guess, aimed at Expedition, more of this is for Throne, is there needs to be something to think about, something more for you to want to go down the rabbit hole of like, well, what if, you know, this now combines better with X card, and X card makes me want to play Y card. And if that opens up the door for somebody to build 4, 5, 6 different decks, that's like one of the best candidates that we can ever find for buffing something.
And then I have one last, this isn't a question, this is just a request.
Yeah.
I want to play with the diesel cycle on Expedition someday.
Oh,
Please
yeah.
make it happen.
Yep, they could definitely show up in Expedition someday. Yeah.
Those cards are fun, and they're just not quite good enough anymore.
All right. Well, I want to thank LightsOutAce for joining us today. I really appreciate all of the insights into sort of what made him the Eternal World Champion, how you could maybe become the Eternal World Champion this year as we get our Eternal Organized Play 2021 season off and running. If people want to check out some of your content, are there any places that they can go to see some of it?
I think all the article websites have been taken down by this point. I haven't done much since my son was born. I've been a lot busier, not streaming as much and not writing articles. But if I'm plugging my stuff, it's twitter.com/LightsOutAce or @LightsOutAce or whatever. YouTube, I'm LightsOutAce1.
All right. So Corey, thanks for joining us as well. You know, I see you every day, but it's always good to hear from you. And thanks, LightsOutAce. And LightsOutAce is qualified for the 2021 Eternal World Championships by being our defending champion. So they will be back later on this year to defend their title as world champion, and we're excited to see that.